Hello everybody, CritCrab here with another story, this one about Ross's ability to reason, committing Sudoku, and annihilating the campaign because he's bored. This is the penultimate Ross video. If you haven't seen the previous Ross stories, I would recommend clicking the link in the description to see his earlier acts of D&D that guyism, as there are a few references you wouldn't fully understand otherwise. But it still isn't really required to be able to fully grasp just how far Ross and Opie are descending into madness. Anyways, prepare your hazmat suit because we're going ever deeper into the toxic fumes of the Ross saga. Roll post. This is the big one. Of all the bullshit Ross put me through, and the list is substantial in both D&D and real life, this is the one that hurt me the most. This was the moment he broke me as a DM and made me just throw my arms up in the air like I just didn't care. Because I didn't anymore. You just can't win against Ross. He's a compact ball of oblivious misery that cannot be defeated, so to oppose him is folly. All you can do is avoid him until he leaves the goddamn country. Who here has ever heard of the Tales of the Outer Plains? If you want to take a minute to either act smugly because you have heard of it, or to quickly look it up so you can act smugly because you're pretending that you've heard about it, you can go ahead right now. The House of TSR was founded on sprawling and insurmountable epic adventures once upon a time. A trend I'm glad to say Wizards has returned to with 5th edition. There was a bit of a dry spell for a while there, but we persevered. What once was great remains so. Tales of the Outer Plains is a boss of a module that's a hell of a lot of crazy fun. Or it would have been, save for Ross's best efforts. Maybe effort is the wrong word because he sure made it seem effortless. You put whatever connotation you want onto these words, it's probably right. Ross was like that illusion where you see a bunny one way or an old lady the other. Is it a bunny or a lady? Was he an asshole or an idiot? Yes. The answer is yes. Anyone too enraptured with my stream of consciousness rantings thinly disguised as a story to go look up Tales of the Outer Plains? Here's a quick rundown of what it is. You know them there Outer Plains? You gonna go there. Which ones, you ask? Yeah. The answer is yeah. Over the course of 12 or so levels, you end up taking a selfie in the elemental plane of water, rent an Airbnb in one of the 7 heavens, get a few photos for the gram in Olympus, and take a walking tour through a couple layers of the abyss. Hashtag living your best PC life. All of this is facilitated by the World Serpent Inn. An interdimensional tavern with rooms that lead to all sorts of fun places. The ethereal plane, for example. Now, this was a 1st edition module, back in the not-to-be-fucked-with lightly days, which worked for me. With a bit of tinkering, it would be a challenging adventure for my 2nd edition players. I'm a DM who isn't afraid to throw my players in the shit. To make it even more interesting, I decided to incorporate an article from Dragon Magazine number 351 titled Alternate Primes. It was a series of adventures that would be tied together through the use of the World Serpent Inn. These adventures would take a party brave enough for the challenge through the different campaign settings of D&D, such as Al-Qadim, Dark Sun, and Ravenloft. I decided I would follow Todd Opie as the main adventure and the AP adventures as a way to mix it up on random occasions, as well as a means by which some extra experience can be earned so as to level match Todd Opie if they ever fell behind in the module. And also because the Ravenloft adventure featured my favorite D&D character of all time, Lord Soth. I'm all about that Soth. Soth features on the cover of that issue, and I have that exact image tattooed onto my arm. Because I like me the Soths. A lots of Soths. I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to put my players into Sithicus is what I'm getting at. By the way, did you know that a group of Soths is known as a boardroom? A boardroom of Soths? There's something new that you know. You're welcome. This story is so aggravating to me after all of these years for a number of reasons. Not only was the adventure epic and awesome, not only was I going to get to play around with my favorite dreadlord, kind of, Not only was this all meant to be a light and breezy distraction from the main campaign, but it also included what I still consider as the best 1-2 combination of PCs I've ever had the privilege of DMing. Marcus Vaughn the Cleric, played by my friend Eric, and Alexander Mann, the Action Man, the Fighter, played by another friend, Rod, worked great together. Marcus was the loyal friend, quiet and wise. Alex was as sharp as a brick, but a jovial and flippant comrade in arms. It was a good pairing. The three of us have made up a pretty consistent core playing group for most of my DMing career, but those two characters worked just beautifully together. There was also a mage played by Ross's friend Max, who he RP'd as a young but eager to learn rookie. And then, there was Ross. He played a paladin named Zelda. She had about as much personality as some old Venetian blinds. Sure, she could cast a shadow, but didn't really accomplish much else beyond that. And we always considered replacing her with something fancier, but never quite got around to that project. Oh my god, I'm actually impressed with how accurate that analogy ended up being. Now, every DM, like every parent, has favorites. Sure, you love all your children equally or whatever, but if there's a Sophie's Choice situation, you already know which one's going down. Every parent and every DM has had that conversation with themselves at one point or another. Ross. Ross was always the answer. Ross is always the answer. I plus fuck equals Ross. Solve for I. It's a tricky question. I is an imaginary number that represents literally any fucking thing. The answer is always Ross. But that doesn't mean I conveyed that. I worked very hard, in fact, to avoid any semblance of my burgeoning hostility to the sound of his stupid voice. My normal playstyle as a DM was to throw a frisbee out there and trust someone will run to it and throw it back. I don't favor anyone. Fun is out there to be had, and all you have to do is get after it. Granted, some people are better than others at catching a frisbee, so when you see that short, chubby old man quietly moping off to the side, you eventually start sailing a few in that direction. You try not to make it obvious, but you're setting him up for an easy one. Ross didn't take to subtleties. Playing frisbee with Ross is like how Bart plays frisbee with Santa's little helper. You could hit him in the fucking face full force with it and his dumb expression still would not change. So, despite meeting gods and planar beings in the ethereal, water, air, fire, and earth planes, as well as day trips to Orth, and, I think this is 10 plus years ago, Sigil, Ross just ain't having fun. He could hang a lampshade on Zelda by doing something generically lawful good every now and then, or casting a healing spell or whatever, but she was never going to grow up and become a real girl. And because Ross wasn't deluded by words like ninja or catgirl with this character, he saw through his own shortcomings for once in his life and realized this was bullshit. And I gotta hand it to him. He was right to not be having fun. It was bullshit. Every session he just sat there and got frisbees thrown in his fucking face all day. I'd get pissed too after a while. So the group is a little over halfway through the module, and if you're worried about spoilers from a 32-year-old's D&D module, well, I can't help you there, bud. Your priorities don't match reality. This is a you problem. So they're halfway through Opie. Alex Mann has just gotten married to the Drider who frequents the tavern. Well, it would be more accurate to say he sold himself into perpetual indentured servitude for the Drider, but he was happy, so whatever. The cleric and the mage have gotten a nice little big brother, little brother thing going on, and Ross's paladin has some pissy blinds all tangled up in its own cord. When, all of a sudden, they are approached by a hooded figure in desperate need of some champions. You see, this person's master, an arcane sage, has had their soul trapped within the astral plane while searching for a legendary magical item known as the Book of the Planes. They agree to go rescue the sage, which is great because they're soon to find out that they're about to prevent a Githyankai invasion of the prime material plane by doing so. Or they would have, except they didn't count on one thing. They can never be defeated. Ross's frustration and idiocy, a deadly combination from which there is no hope of salvation. So we're cruising along when, behold, they've found the trail. The silver thread tethering the mage's body to the mage's soul has been found. All they need to do is find the mage's soul, stumble across the Githyan Kai, foil their invasion, gather the Book of the Plains, and, following the thread, just row back to Spain like there's no mañana. Simple, right? Well, it's D&D, so there are always encounters. Don't act shocked, you know there are always encounters, and Ross has had enough of this. Being attacked by some demons, everyone rolls initiative. Eric does this, Max does that, Rod does something else, Ross, on his turn, thinks for a moment. You see, in his mind, he has reasoned that the demons are after the silver thread, the one that's tethering the mage's soul to her freaking body. And he reasons still further that if the demons want it, then it is the problem. I cut the thread. No DM ever wants to actively thwart a player's decision. If a player wants to be stupid, they can live with the consequences. The DM has the benefit of knowing what the consequences will be, and is often more than happy to inflict them for their own perverse amusement. I speak from experience. You want to draw how many cards from the deck of many things? You got it, Sparky. Congratulations, the god of the undead fucking hates you now, so you might want to keep an eye out for that. But, now and again, a decision will be considered so dumb that it threatens the fabric of the game. And in those times, we DMs will ask the question that carries more weight than anything else in all of Dungeons & Dragons could possibly carry. It's those 3 little words that will give even the most cavalier of adventurer pause to consider their life choices. Are you sure? It's the tone that sells it. The 3 other players, even Ross's shut-in of a friend that had no D&D experience prior to this game, takes note. Their heads swivel in unison to look back at Ross, who is suddenly very alone in the room. And to his credit, he pauses. He considers his actions, he weighs his options, and re-examines the playing field. Well, I can't think of anything else to do, so yeah, I cut the thread. Too much credit, apparently. His teammates start assailing him with suggestions and cries of fear. That silver thread, the one that tethers the mage's soul to her body, might kill her if cut. And Ross's paladin is surely wise enough to maybe figure this out. And a paladin wouldn't knowingly kill someone if that's a possibility. Surely? But Ross is done. If he considered stabbing the demons that were attacking instead of murdering a helpless NPC, his frustration clouded his reasoning. And don't call him Shirley. With a grumpy expression, and I swear to God an eye misty from frustration at his own impotence as a player, he just nods. Yeah, I don't know what to do. I cut the thread. For a second there, I was transported back to a moment years prior. A moment where I, Eric, and Ross sat together around that very same table, and I had asked him what he wanted to do on his turn. During and between the conversations, I keep asking Ross what he's doing. Each and every time I get the same response. He sits there in deep thought, gets this pissy look on his face, says he can't think of anything else to do, shoots his proton pack at the cab, misses, gets yelled at by the cops. Then, as now, Ross had been given the opportunity to reconsider his decision at the behest of his GM and his teammate alike. And then, as now, Ross had weighed and measured everything and doubled down on doing the wrong thing, and it became all so clear to me in that moment. I had adopted Ross into my life when he was in a terrible situation. I had let him live with me rent-free for over a month, moved all his shit from a literal dungeon into my place, and then later into the apartment I found for him. And then I became roommates with him for 5 straight years, all out of pity. Because he reminded me of the socially retarded idiot I had once been when I was 15 years old, and hadn't gotten my shit together and done some growing up. Just a sad, inept sack of bewilderment. Except he was 5 years older than me. I had been convinced that all he needed was someone in his corner, someone to give him the benefit of the doubt, and over time he'd get better. But there he was, years later, unchanged, doing the exact same thing for the exact same reason, because he was a stupid asshole from the womb to the tomb. There were frustrations in our friendship, both big and small, but honestly, I think that this was the moment I realized I was done with him. Even though it was a genuinely innocuous thing, just a game of D&D, I finally accepted that Ross was going to continue festering as he was. I think it's because it was just such an unimportant thing that I'd finally gotten that perspective. Like the more important stuff had been prepared for. This was small enough to slip through my defenses. He was not going to change, he was not going to get better. So, I closed my book. Alright. Well, you do that. You're no longer a paladin, as you just murdered someone. You'll have to atone for that before you can get your powers back, and I honestly don't know how to proceed because you're all now lost in the astral plane and you can't stop a world-ending event. I need a few weeks to think about this. Turns out it took more than a few weeks to figure out. About 2 years ago, we were playing Out of the Abyss when they made it to Graven Hollow. I Easter egged Marcus searching for tomes on the astral plane, so about 10 years for any movement on a resolution. Marcus still hadn't forgiven Zelda, so whatever had happened in the intervening years must have been bad. Eric and Rod were stoked when they recognized Marcus out of character and regaled the other players with tales of the Planeswalker campaign Ross had derailed. Max spewing Pepsi out of his nose when being welcomed to the club. Marcus Vaughn's incredible wired clothes hanging apparatus. Alex's unbelievable cooking skills, the weird but good, but weird experience that is best left undescribed, and Ross. That time, Ross fucking killed an entire campaign. So yeah, but this was just the side campaign. I still had my main campaign. And if this is the only time you think Ross had ever single-handedly caused me to end an entire campaign by being stupid, well, I haven't done a very good job of explaining just who it is we're dealing with here, but I got you covered. I still got one more tale for you. TLDR, Paladin murders NPC because the player isn't having fun. Ends campaign by helplessly stranding the entire party in the astral plane. End post. Honestly, there is a lot to be said here. For any of you who read my community post a few days ago, I have my doubts about OP. I don't really have much of a reason to doubt his credibility or honesty, but I think he tends to make a really big deal and overreact over relatively small things. Like, for those of you who saw the last two stories, he seems to have reacted a little over the top in the Cringe to the Max video 2 Ross stories ago. But in the next story, he completely and totally flips out over Ross climbing walls and hurting himself. He has been saying and exposing things about Ross that are really completely uncalled for, and I have seen people take far worse circumstances with far more grace. However, after reading this story, I think I'm kind of getting it. OP has had to live with someone who exhibits these behaviors every single day. Not just in D&D or whatever game they're playing at the time, but in the real world. And I can assume that has led to a lot of built-up tension and negativity that didn't really have an outlet before, especially if he's the non-confrontational type. Am I excusing OP or Ross even? No, not really. My opinion of both of them is still largely unchanged, but all I'm saying is that I think I'm beginning to understand why OP seems so vicious and hostile towards someone who legitimately just kinda seems like he doesn't get it. But I'll reserve the rest of my sentiments for after the next Ross story. The final Ross story. If you enjoyed this video, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. Till next time.